these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths. We hold these truths.
With Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
John, thanks for coming on.
It's an honor. Thanks for having me.
All right. I don't know how much of an introduction you need. Let's. I asked you before we started, how's your golf game improved?
It's status quo, which is not good. The answer is if you keep score, I'm the wrong person to be playing with.
Yeah. But we played pretty well together because I don't keep score either. So that's actually the first time we met.
Yes.
And what year was it? I wasn't running yet.
Yeah,
I wasn't
you were
either.
You hadn't won your primary yet. You were. But that was the phase that it was at.
It's for the Yellow Ribbon Fund
Yep.
fundraiser. Yeah, just playing golf, raising some money for veterans. That was fun.
It's also as you well know. There's some great causes and Yellow Ribbon Fund, one of them that I'm on the board of. I don't think people appreciate the fact that for a lot of folks when they go through Walter Reed or wherever. The government doesn't pay for their spouse to come or a lot of those incidental expenses. Yeah. Yellow Ribbon takes care of the rental cars, the hotels. Because a lot of times I got one buddy that's on his 125th or 6th surgery. And what happens is to stay in a hotel, to have your spouse or your kid come. Let's just, even if you assume it's 3 nights, 4 nights. I mean, it's a hotel room in Bethesda, Maryland. A couple $1,000 by the time you're in. Yeah. So for a lot of folks, that's an insurmountable cost, and Yellow Ribbon picks up the tab, which is great. One of the things that is so interesting is that I come across people, and I don't know if you do, where they're amazed at what the VA does and doesn't cover, right? And so why doesn't the government cover it? And I think some of it's an interesting point, but the bottom line is it doesn't. And so a lot of these organizations step up to the plate, fill a need, and make sure that we're honoring the sacrifice and service that so many individuals have made.
What I like about, this is totally off topic of what we were going to talk about, but what I like about nonprofits doing advice to the government, and it depends on the issue, because some people are like, why doesn't the government do it? Well, maybe the government shouldn't do it. Maybe it wouldn't be very good at it. Right. This is a very big philosophical difference between the left and the right. The left always gets very frustrated when they see any nonprofit doing something. But then you ask them, okay, you have $100 free money, right? Would you rather just give it to the Treasury, or would you give it to a nonprofit of your choice? And they'll always say nonprofit of my choice, because they feel like they know where it's going and they feel like they know what it'll be used for, which is very rational. But then why do you make the philosophical governing
I think
argument?
There's two things. One, to your point, the nice thing about nonprofits is they can be adaptable, right? So if a need is sort of not textbook need, which in a lot of cases, especially when it comes to veterans, they're not textbook.
Right.
Someone has something that requires assistance that doesn't fit the definition that some bureaucrat wrote, so the nonprofit can be flexible in terms of how they help them. But secondly, I mean, the left, I think, ultimately wants a larger and bigger government. And so they can't resist wanting government to do things because it creates a dependency that they need
and
to exist. Because
base.
look, at the end of the day, if less people are dependent on government and more self-sufficient, there's no left.
And the other reason it's better, too, a nonprofit can be discerning. You can't be discerning at the VA, right? Because once you start one benefit, and maybe it's very tailored, maybe it's like if you were wounded in combat, we pay for your families. But then somebody who's in the hospital who wasn't necessarily wounded in combat, well, why can't I get that benefit? And then somebody else, why can't I get that benefit? And that benefit gets expanded exponentially to a point where it's unsustainable. And I think there's a lot of issues like that in the DoD and VA. Different conversation.
Right. Well,
let's talk politics.
A worthy one.
Yeah. Well, okay. Let's actually. We're having this conversation right after the Virginia governor's race. That was an awesome night for America. Not just in Virginia. I mean, there's other races. This New Jersey race was extremely close, and I should have expected that we would win that, but I did not expect it to be this close. It's almost frustrating because it's very few votes. We could have gotten out those votes.
Yeah. Hindsight's 20/20, of course. And I think the frustrating thing with New Jersey is there wasn't good data on that because it's not a state that plays presidentially. Yeah. So it was very hard for a lot of people to read. And you know this in politics, now that you're elected, how many candidates walk up and say, listen, it's a lot closer than people believe. I got a shot. And the problem is you can only go with what you know, right? And the problem in New Jersey is we only had at least some rather scant public polling. and that what we did even privately was not that reliable. So it's hindsight, but I will tell you, overall, you're absolutely right. I mean, the idea of the night that we had, whether it's New Jersey, the Minneapolis pushing back on defund the police, I mean, throughout the country was a good night for both Republican candidates, but also for the conservative movement. And I think that it's interesting. I gave a speech yesterday in California and said this, and it was so funny how literally quickly it became true, which was immediately after the loss, the White House doubled down and said, we need to push everything through. I think these guys get it. They know they're going to lose the House, right? Yeah. So they're basically like, look, we got 12 months, whatever you want to call it, 11 months, that we need to get everything through. So we either walk out of this deal of controlling all the government with nothing or as much as possible. So suck it up. And that's literally what they said this morning. Like, my guess is they're calling Manchin and saying, put a number on a cocktail napkin, send it over, and that's the deal.
Do you think this gives the moderates like Manchin more leverage, or do things stay the same? It's hard for me to read the intentions of the Democrats.
I think one of the points that I made in my new book, Radical Nation, is that I believe that the one thing that we need to understand about Joe Biden is this. He wants a place in history. He wants a legacy, and that legacy is to be the most progressive president to outdo FDR. He said it publicly a couple days ago. He talked about transforming the country. 3 Fridays ago, he said, if we pass my 1.2 and 3.5 pieces of legislation, we will fundamentally transform the structure and nature of the economy. This is not a guy who wants to tinker on the edges. This is not a guy who just says, I want to be president so my name goes down in the history books as the 46th president. He literally wants people to look at him for generations as the new FDR. Yeah. Therefore, I believe that they are going to say, cut every deal possible to get as much of this progressive agenda through. Now, Manchin, in particular, is going to have a hand in saying yes, no, red light, green light. But they will figure out where those touch points are and say, get as much through as possible.
Yeah. It kind of sounds like nothing really changed, because I think the interest on the Democrats.
But here's what I think in my experience, a normal politician would say, all right, we've got the midterms coming up. Let's preserve what we can, tack to the center, look like we got the message. We're moderating. I mean, you saw it. Bush did this. Obama did this. Clinton, where they sort of triangulate and say, hey, we got to go back to the middle. We got to look like we got the message. We had gone too far. We'll rein it back in. I think this administration says, we're going to lose the House. Wake up. Yeah. So therefore, just get
very fatalist attitude. And
right.
So
but it's also realistic. And I think that,
it's not irrational, I guess.
I give them credit
if you're an extremist Democrat,
right.
It's not irrational.
But it's also, but they can go to the squad and progressives and say, guys, you're either going to walk out of the next year with nothing in hand if we play this little game, or here are the 5-6 things that we can jam through. Which would you rather have? Because you're not getting everything, but you may end up with nothing if you overplay your hand.
Yeah, I guess that's a rational way of looking at it. It's still unfortunate for America.
Oh, it's horrible
because
for America.
Whatever they do get through, even what something like somebody like Manchin will agree to, it'll still be pretty damaging.
Well, look, we were talking about the VA, and so anything that the government gets its hands on, it never lets go, right? So whether it's 1.2 trillion or 1.8 trillion, that's a lot of money, and it's a lot of future government that you'll never turn back. And that's what I think should worry folks, is that it's not like they're just spending money and then, they're buying new office furniture for everyone in the government. They're implementing programs that will continue to cost us forever and only grow.
Yeah, they will. Let's talk communications for a second, how they communicate some of these things. Obviously, you were press secretary under Donald Trump. Quite the experience, I'm sure. So maybe we just had Kayleigh McEnany on, and we really got into this. I mean, what the purpose of this briefing is, how it is a Democrat versus Republican. Maybe walk us through that first day.
Oh, geez. There's 2 first days, I think. The first day that most people know about and read about, and then what I like to call the official first day. The thing that was so fascinating is I had served for the last 3 years of the Bush administration. And frankly, whether it's Republican or Democrat, you look back and there's this template. Like, this is how you all act. This is the traditions. And yet the Trump White House and the Trump the candidate and then president-elect was like, I don't really care about that. And it gave us a lot of latitude to rethink things, which I thought was actually really healthy. But anyway, the first briefing that everybody knows about is the one we came out and we talked about the inauguration and crowd size and stuff. And the thing that was fascinating is if you go back to, I think it was January 11th, 9 days before, we had held this press conference. It was right when the so-called dossier had come out. And we had just come out and literally delivered like a verbal punch to the media. Like, this is ridiculous. And then candidate Trump was, very pleased, very excited. That was exactly how I want you to handle that. It was great. So the first day, we had kicked off after he'd gotten sworn in, signed these executive orders. We thought we hit the ground running. It was great. The bust of Martin Luther King had been erroneously alleged to have been removed, which I still don't understand. I mean, it was a brand new Oval Office, so I'm not really sure how you would remove something to be. I mean, I assume everything gets taken out and cleaned and what have you. And so the idea that the press picked up on that right away, to me, was such a ridiculous thing. And so we walked into like
just give you an indication of how
but
petty,
I mean, you think about this like
be.
This is like your first day, right? That you're like, are you kidding me? That someone's focused on like, and you have to understand. I mean, you ask when you walk into the Oval Office, imagine you're staring at that Resolute desk, right? That's the view the press has. So that's what they're looking at, the desk, the president sitting behind it doing work. The Martin Luther King bust traditionally, at least from where Obama had it, was behind them, right? So that means that somebody walked into a room and literally was scanning around, not looking at the president and say, what's going on in this room? What are you doing? What actions are you taking on behalf of the American people? What can I find that's a little gotcha moment? And so, there was apparently a Secret Service agent blocking it, and so they immediately start tweeting out, President Trump has removed the bust of Martin Luther King.
But it never got removed.
No, it was literally if the individual moved out of the way, they would see it. And they didn't even check. They didn't say, hey, by the way, I didn't see it. Because again, my point when I initially saw the report was, of course it's not there. Like, it's the first day. They probably took everything out, and then you put it back piece by piece because it's a new rug, a new desk, a new curtains, all that. I mean, so I didn't really think it would have been that big a deal to begin with. But I say all this because this is literally the beginning and the attitude, the mentality of how we're coming in, which is like, you've got to be kidding me. Mm-hmm. Like day one, it wasn't even day one. It was like half day because you get sworn in at noon. Within the first few hours, this is what we're dealing with. And so wake up the next day, blah, blah, blah. The president's like, you got to be kidding me. He turns on a couple different news channels, and they're trying to make this case about no one pays attention and no one's here and no one cared about Trump and there's less people. Look,
the crowd size controversy. Let's get into that.
And I'm going to be honest with you. Like, I've said this very publicly. That was like, looking back on it, that was a rushed statement, and everything about it was done improperly. From all the training I had in so many different facets, that was just handled inappropriately. But you got the president of the United States basically saying, go out and fix this, make it better, chastise. And so I thought, okay, I know exactly based on that January 11th presser that we had 10 days earlier what to do. And I come out and I'm like, I'm just going to beat the crap out of these guys and punch them in the face verbally. And I get back to my office, and the president calls. He's up in the residence, and he was just like, "What the heck was it?" Well, some other words, but he was basically like, "What was that? Like, what did you?" And I thought, "What do you mean?" I went out and I made the cake, and he was like, "That was horrible." And I'm like, "Oh my god, it's day one." I don't.
Sure, he's an easy boss to work for.
Yeah, he's ready. He's like, "Okay, all forgiven, move on." No, it was. I've never felt a pit like that in my stomach.
So what did he want? Exactly.
I don't, to this day. I mean, at that point, you're just like, how do I get out of here? Like, that's the mentality was, how do I take the temperature down? How do I move on? Because you don't sit there and say like, hey, so what should I have done? At that point, I mean, what should I have done is literally sat down with him before and say, okay, walk me through the points that you want to make, not what I think they are. That was the biggest mistake I made. I made a ton of assumptions about what he would have wanted. Mm-hmm.
So how easy is that then on any given issue to get into the mind of the president? Because do you guys have scheduled meetings every morning?
So traditionally, and that's why I'm saying before, having talked to a lot of the predecessors, I thought, okay, I know how this works. I know what, and Trump was just very different. Like, so what I would do is it was like, I told people it was like cramming for a final exam every day. So I would come in, literally get up at 5, I'd be in the office by about 6:30, and then you just start cramming. And then after I had read a lot of source material, I'd have people come in, subject matter experts, National Security Council, legislative affairs, you name it, come in and say, okay, guys, this is what I'm going to get asked about today. Here are the 10 things that I know are going to come up. Tell me where, whatever. And so normally that would be acceptable, meaning that the leg affairs guys would tell you the position of the president. Like, we're saying that this, and the NSC guys would come in and say, from a national security perspective, or the council's office, but they would tell you what they would say, our position as an administration is X. And that's that's how it's always worked. This president, though, would be like, no, I don't care what they said. This is what I think. And you would then have this battle where you'd call maybe back legislative affairs and say, okay, he says he's not going to fight for this bill, and da-da-da, and they'd say, oh gosh, he has to. We promised it to Congressman Dan Crenshaw that we do this, so we got to go back into the Oval, and then we'd have it out being like, hey, Mr. President, I know you don't want to say we're doing this, but we are going to do it. We have to because you said da-da-da, and we'd come up with something collectively. So I would then spend, upwards sometimes of 2-3 iterations over maybe an hour and a half period where I come back in and say, okay, here's what we've settled on. Are you good with this? Mm-hmm. Which is, I think, vastly
to make
different.
sure you don't get that angry call.
Right.
About the
and
crowd
so the
sizes.
idea was to basically say, and then outside of those 10 issues, you were like, okay, if I basically learned real quick, if you haven't run something by him, don't say that you know what he thinks, because you haven't, and you haven't spoken. So it was a very...
Yeah, and he's unconventional to say the least.
Correct.
So
Which is, but you think about the difference. I made this comment the other day in a New York Times profile piece on current White House Secretary Jen Psaki, and I meant it a little tongue-in-cheek, but seriously, like I said, look, I walked in the Lion's Den every day, and Jen walks into a bunch of kittens. And I don't think that is that... That's that controversial. Watch any clip, and it looks like a bunch of hyenas jumping up and down trying to come after me. Whereas
crazy,
Jen walks in and it's like a Greenwich prep school being like, Miss Psaki, may I go to the restroom now?
She's so great. She's so great.
I know. It's
except for Peter Ducey. He does his job.
But Peter Ducey does it. Like, it's the thing that's so funny. The one guy in there who literally asks the question that we're all thinking does it in a respectful, civil way.
He does. And
everybody goes, oh my God, Peter,
well.
that's not Jim Acosta. Jim Acosta
Right.
ran out of his seat, threw two hands at you.
Yeah,
and,
very performative.
And Ducey sits there calm and professional and says, Jen, 3 days ago you said X. Today you're saying Y. Can you reconcile that?
Yeah.
It's a very
reasonable
logical,
questions.
reasonable question.
And I don't think they're gotcha questions.
Right, but he's the only one.
He is the only one. But Newsmax going to get anybody in there?
We do.
Soon?
We have two people there.
Yeah.
But that tells you that what's interesting about that question, we have two White House correspondents that don't get called on, right? Because what Jen has learned, and again, she feeds the beast. She takes care of the Washington Post, the CNNs, New York Times, right? So they're not going to complain. As long as they're getting their due, they're good. Yeah. They're never going to say, what about everyone else? Because again, they'd rather, as long as they're getting taken care of, A, they're fine, and B, if other people are getting shut out, that's even better for them because it allows them to monopolize the narrative. But that's what Jen's been able to do, is call on, and then she throws the Peter Ducey question out there to kind of check the box and say, see, I went to Fox.
How do you think the Trump White House evolved over 4 years? Because a lot of changes in staff, probably a lot of learning curves going on.
Yeah.
And, how did he change? How did the management change in the White House, do you think, over 4 years?
I think overall it got better in the sense that at the beginning we were all new. We were like this ragtag bunch of people. I mean, no one had, except I was the only person that had worked in a White House before that I'm aware of. And I worked for, I think, 10 different members of Congress. I mean, like that, this was a bunch of people who came together because they believed in Donald Trump, not because they had worked in government before. And in almost every campaign prior, you think about it, Governor Bush, Senator Obama, Governor Clinton, they had been in government, had a collective group of people that had worked for them, that had lobbied them, that had consulted on them to draw from into government. Trump didn't have that. So there were unequivocally some growing pains, and some people were really good at what they did, and some people were never going to be good fits. But I think as the years went on, it got a little bit better and stable, and the right kind of fits came in. I think the one thing that he did, I think, was become more aware of who the motives of people, the way government operated, and who was maybe a good fit. So I think early on, he looked at it strictly as as a CEO. And in government, it's not always the same, in terms of how it operates, and having an inside knowledge of it, of an agency or an issue from a government perspective is not always the same from a business perspective in terms of being able to affect change.
Yeah, I mean, it's helpful to know the industry. It's helpful to know the institution, whatever that is. Okay, here's a question I think everybody wants to know. Did you ever talk to him about tweeting?
Oh, all the time. Yeah, but like, look, one of the things that people ask, and is, did you tell him to stop or stuff? You don't tell Donald Trump to stop doing anything. It just doesn't. But there were days when you would say, hey, we're having a really good day. We've just done this, this, and this. It probably would be good to stay on message and not tweet anything off topic today.
Sometimes that works. Sometimes it didn't.
Yeah, I was going to say, sometimes it did and sometimes it didn't. But he was a master at driving narratives. So sometimes we stepped on ourselves, but other times he created new openings communications.
Yeah, you saw that occasionally.
So
it's
just
interesting.
But it was a very, I'm used to for 2.5 decades going in and saying, okay, here's our communication strategy. Here's all the tactics. Here's what we're trying to achieve at the end, and then here's how these tactics are going to be utilized to get us to that goal. Are you good with this? Right? You get sign off from the principal that you work for, and said, okay, good. Then let's go execute it. Trump was very much the opposite. He's like, I'm going to do this. Now you just go amplify it. It's a very different dynamic to get used to as a communicator, because instead of you driving the train and the principal being the person who's at the front, Trump was sort of like way out front, and then you were in the back trying to say how much amplification can I give this message that he wants now, or how can I direct it? But, through a single tweet, he would, ultimately make a decision about a policy or personnel decision that was going to drive the media. And so he didn't need us in the same way that a traditional politician might.
Yeah, I mean, unconventional to say the least, like I said. But you know what you're getting with him. There's another side to him where he does listen too. So I mean, you could be like, whoa. I know you want to be out front on this, but please don't. I mean, I think Afghanistan's a pretty good example of this. Because obviously that went really bad a couple months ago. It's still going very bad. There's going to be horror stories coming out of Afghanistan for a long time. And people point out, well, Trump woke up every day and said, get the troops out.
Yes.
And it would have ended up like this. And people like me went and told him that. I said, please do not do this. This will end in horror. And ultimately, he ended up listening. I mean,
yes.
What if he had made the same decision in the year 2021? In the end, it doesn't matter because he's not president.
Well,
in the year
and that's the thing. And
2021.
also remember, and I think your point is well taken, that there is a difference between getting people out and how you do it, right? It's like anything else. You can share the same goal, but the execution of it matters. And so when the folks on the left go, well, Trump wanted to get out too, that's not the point. How we did it was a disaster.
Yeah, how we did it. We might differ on that because I think if you go to zero troops, you're going to get the result no matter what. But again, he did put conditions on
right.
it.
And I also think, but the idea of the equipment and how we left American citizens over. I mean, like I think that the phasing of it would have been different. According
to Mike Pompeo, it would have been.
But the reason I say that is because of what you just said. There were enough people that were telling him, "Okay, I got it. Let's do it this way." And you notice that despite saying it from day one for 4 years, he agreed to a gradual drawdown. And I mean,
he let himself get talked out of it.
Listening to enough people that were smart about this that I think they would have continued to advise him in a smarter way. What interestingly, those same people told the same things to President Biden, who just overrode them.
Oh yeah, yep, and that's well documented now. I tell people, you can be mad at the generals in the military all you want for botching it. It's not clear to me that they did. It's very unclear to me that given the parameters and the mission,
and people
they could have done it differently.
Right. At some point, if it's a lawful order, they have to follow it. They can present a series of options or courses of action and say, okay, this is what we believe. But ultimately, the political leadership in our country tells the military what to do. If it's a lawful order, they must execute it.
All right, let's move on to today's era, and you got a book called Radical Nation. There, when is it out?
Came out last Tuesday.
Okay, came out last Tuesday. I'm assuming it's about what Biden and Harris are on the cover, so I'm assuming it's about.
That's a good guess.
About that. And this botched Afghanistan withdrawal is just a one example of many of radical policies, right? Like this. Let's not listen to reason. Let's not moderate our views. Let's not debate this. Let's just do the thing that the progressive left wants the most. Now, Afghanistan's a little different because I think the libertarian right wanted it also, and I I'm fully against both of them on this particular issue, but we don't need to talk about Afghanistan anymore. They want to be extreme on a lot of different things. So is that what this book is about?
So the book is two things. One, it lays out the people and the policies that they're implementing, and I think how they drift us to a radical thing, to what I call a radical nation. And the reason I say that is it goes back to the beginning of our conversation. I think Biden gets a political legacy probably better than any politician in the sense that, Trump wanted to make America great, but I had enough conversations where he wasn't thinking, I want to go down as X. Like that was not, he kind of thought if I do all these good things, then, history will judge me accordingly. Biden's goal is to be the most liberal, progressive president. He has said it himself. It's a goal, right? And so what I do is I think I frankly deconstruct it because I don't think most people, they think, oh, Joe Biden's been in Washington for half a century, which, by the way, when you say that out loud and go half a century,
a long time.
And I think that they think we know him. He's a pragmatic institutionalist that's not going to veer out of the normal way. But that's not, he's already told us he wants to do this. And so he has put people in places running the government merely because they're checking a box, because they help him cement that part of his legacy. But then he's pursuing what I consider radical policies, making D.C. a state, this whole $1 trillion+ spending deal that he's gotten, the immigration coming over our southern border, packing the court. All of these things are in pursuit of this liberal, progressive legacy that he wants to cement. And you have to understand that they all tie together and that's what they're in pursuit of. If he really just wants to be able to walk away and say, I was the most progressive, look at the people I appointed. I mean, think about this. Kamala Harris was roundly dismissed by her own party as a viable candidate. Mm-hmm. He chose her not because she was the best or the most qualified, but because she was the first female of color. That's it. He made it very clear that I'm going to choose. So that was it. He chose his Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, not because he was the most qualified 38-year-old that had run a city of 100,000 with 66 buses, that he was the most qualified because, and I write it in the book, that he chose him because he, quote, checked two boxes. He was one of the youngest cabinet department leaders ever, and he was the first leader of a cabinet department, i.e. he had to be very careful with what he said because Rick Grenell had been in the cabinet of Trump to lead a department. He literally says that when he's confirmed. And Buttigieg says, thank you very much. I'm pleased to be part of this, legacy of yours. Not I'm the most qualified, not I'm glad to be here. And I don't know Pete Buttigieg very well. I know people who know him and say he's very smart. He's had, he served our country. I'm not taking a dig at his intellect or his abilities. He's in the wrong job.
Yeah, he is.
And so, but look at Dennis McDonough. He's running the VA. He's the second person to only not serve in the military to lead the VA. And the first was Dr. David Shulkin, who Obama had appointed. It worked in the VA. Trump kept him over, made him secretary, but the title, doctor, and as you are well aware, the largest, greatest service the VA provides is healthcare. So Trump thought, hey, here's a doctor that understands the VA. He'd be great to go in. What is McDonough? He's never served in the military. He's never worked with veterans groups. He's no background in healthcare. He's not even a mortgage lender, for goodness sakes, which is the other big thing that the VA does.
Jeez.
And so
what is his background?
That's it. He was Obama's chief of staff.
Oh,
I mean,
that's
my point is that it's a series of box checking.
Yeah.
And cementing a legacy, not actually saying what's the right thing for the government, what's the best thing for the taxpayers and the citizens of this country. But again, you go to the people, the policies, and you realize if you scratch beneath the surface, this is all they're really doing. That's why they want to make D.C. a state. Mm-hmm. It's not because of voting rights. It's because they want 2 additional U.S. senators that will, in perpetuity, right? Yeah. But they sell these things really nice, right? Yeah. They go, it's about voting rights, and I'm for voting rights, and you're for voting rights. So you think to yourself, oh, but then you pull back the curtain and realize that all of the things that these guys are for is maintaining political power. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the D.C. statehood thing. I mean, I think it would get struck down as unconstitutional.
But do you want to? I mean, here's the thing. This goes back to the spending type of thing. Once it becomes a state, you can't undo it, right? So they're willing to take the shot and making it a state, hoping. I mean, I thought the same thing with McCain-Feingold back in the day. Okay, the court will rule it unconstitutional. It didn't. I mean, it took a long time to chip away at that.
It would
but the thing is that
process.
I think that it's unconstitutional. But I think if you do it right, there is a way in which you can take D.C., I mean, you take from the White House to the Capitol, carve out a federal district, maintain what the framers said. But think about this. in 1790, they took part of Virginia, they took part of Maryland and created this 10 by 10 square mile district. In 1835, they gave back the part of Virginia that was taken. That's where I live now. When you fly into Washington Reagan Airport, you are actually landing in Virginia now. If we want to help the people of D.C. vote, give back to Maryland what was taken.
That's the best argument, I think, is just
because
give
it's
it to
the most
Maryland.
logical,
You're
right? So
You're
why
talking
would
about
you
very
create a
small
new
area.
state when you can say, we took this little, few neighborhoods from Maryland, let's give it back to Maryland. Frankly, if you're Maryland, you're happier, right? You get more people, you get more tax dollars, you get another probably congressional district. Maryland should be happy about it. But Democrats don't want that because it doesn't give them the power that they ultimately seek.
Yeah, and that's all it's about.
But part of the book, that's why I'm saying, is deconstructing this so that when you go sit down at Thanksgiving or Christmas or Hanukkah or New Year's and someone comes up to you and says, okay, they start arguing the liberal talking points. I think to be able to deconstruct the left's arguments in a logical, systematic way is crucial to us winning, because they put these nice bumper stickers on things and say, build back better. Let's be for voting rights. And everybody goes, oh, okay, that sounds good.
I want voting rights.
I want voting rights, right?
Yeah.
And the media won't go through the argument that I just did when it comes to, like, D.C.
Or ask the question, wait, do we not have voting rights right now? Who doesn't have the right to vote?
And that's another thing, right? So you got H.R. 1. I cannot stand this narrative that the media perpetuates, that people are having tighter voting restrictions in Texas or Georgia, whatever. It's
insane.
Every single American has always been able to vote in person and in absentee. In every single state in this union, you can vote absentee. They're now saying that if you can't vote when you want,
they want you to be able to drive around the corner, yell your vote, and then somebody could take it down.
They call that rolling it back.
Right. it's just like, you can't. I look at when we talk about election integrity and the arguments we should be making. There's arguments we shouldn't be making. But the arguments we should be making are simple. It's a game. It's a competition, and in competitions you have to have very strict rules. You can't just keep expanding that set of rules until you can't even tell who's winning and losing, because just like any game, it would be unplayable.
Well, but think about that. You're absolutely right in terms of the analogy. Imagine, let's say any game that takes 60 minutes, and in the middle of the game at halftime, you go, we're going to make the second half 45 minutes. You go, wait, no, you can't just do that.
Yeah.
Right? That's what they're doing. You saw this in New Jersey's election, where the ACLU, in the middle of election day, filed a lawsuit to extend the hour past 8 p.m., which was in law.
Yesterday.
They file a lawsuit in the middle of the day. Now, if you really thought that was going to be a problem, why wouldn't you have done it on Monday or Sunday or Saturday or Friday?
Sad to see the ACLU go so
But these
far.
guys, they will change the rules however they see fit to.
Right. They think they're not getting their voters out, so they want to
So then
extend
they
it. They
extend
didn't
it, right.
succeed in that, I'm assuming.
No.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, that's my point, though, is that all of these things.
You can see their strategy.
They're straight there. It's right there, but so many times, I've got 2 chapters about the media to explain this omission that's happening. That if you wake up right now and watch the Today Show or Good Morning America or read the Washington Post or whatever, you almost live in an alternative universe where certain things don't happen. Biden is never wrong or bad. Policies don't fail. Double standards don't exist. Hypocrisy doesn't get called out. Because they I think, are just largely complicit with this agenda.
This agenda, the deeply progressive agenda, this legacy that Biden himself wants to engage in, I question whether he's always dreamed of this, or whether he even has that kind of deep-seated intellect. Because people ask me all the time, who's running the White House? Because they just don't believe it's Biden, and I think that's a fair question. Because look, he ran as a moderate. He won the primaries as a moderate, and he certainly doesn't govern that way. So his intentions are curious to say the least. And what's going on in his head?
Well, but there's
confusing.
2 things. One, to your first question, there's that anecdote in the book where Susan Collins from Maine talks about this meeting that they're having, and Ron Klain, the White House chief of staff, is basically, while Biden's talking, shaking his head no. And I recant that a bunch of these Republican senators have nicknamed him Prime Minister Klain, because that's who they claim is running the White House. But secondly, I also talk about this meeting that Biden had early on with all these historians and said, talk to me about legacy. All these left-leaning historians came into the White House, sat down with him, and he really, to your second question there, I think he does get legacy.
Yeah.
And he does say, I want to go down in history as a guy that did X that was this guy. And if you just get 4 or 5 things done, yes, maybe someone will talk about that in the future when it comes to that issue. But I think that, going back to the people part as well as the policies, he wants to cement himself as the guy that had all of these diversity first.
Yeah.
Not that because that way it'll always be like, well, Biden did this, and Biden was the guy who trailblazed this path on, diversifying the cabinet in a particular way or hiring these type of people. They want all of these woke first so that they can go down. But I do think that...
Go down at least with a certain segment of America.
Correct, right.
As memorable.
Yes. But that way, look, I even know enough people that served in the Obama administration that literally are now looking at him in terms of the priorities that he has and saying, he's actually doing more than we ever dreamed of. And I think he gets that. It's that yes, he's a 78-year-old white dude, but he will go down as a hero to so many of these groups on the far left.
Yeah, he will. It's a pretty small segment of society in the end.
Sure.
When you do survey data on that, 7 to 10%, maybe 15% max.
But again,
but they're loud.
But they're loud, and it's also like let's say that you are a plain old middle of the run Democrat that gets 2 or 3 kind of agenda items done. You'll go down with 2 to 3% as someone who gets really I think he understands that I'd rather go down with a hardcore group that will forever talk about the Biden days and the Biden administration than 2 or 3 that will talk about some executive order that he signed.
Right. And Americans feel betrayed as a result because, he did run as that moderate.
Right.
He did not run on these.
Well, that's what I mean. Think about the phrases that I used a moment ago where he literally says, I want to transform the America, the country, and then I want to change the structure and nature of the economy. I don't think even Democrats were like, whoa, pump the brakes on that, brother. Like, that's not what we signed up for. We wanted less tweeting, and we wanted, maybe a little left center.
Democratic voters, not politicians,
right?
The politicians.
And I think so suddenly they were like, this is not what we bought into.
And Virginia's a good indication of that. That's a 10-point Biden win.
Yeah.
That is, I don't know what the final percentage was.
Right now, Youngkin's up 2.3%.
Okay.
And Winsome Sears, our lieutenant governor, is just under that. And Jason Miyares, our our attorney general candidate, he's clinging to about a 1% lead. But the irony, by the way, and I love pointing this out, is the Republicans had the diversity ticket. Mm-hmm. First black woman, Winsome Sears, who is a Marine veteran.
Yeah.
Jason Miyares, first generation Cuban American. It was cool. And of course it didn't get covered because that doesn't go with the narrative. No. But it was awesome as a Republican to see these firsts in Virginia owned on the Republican side.
Yeah, it's awesome to see some of the meltdowns. I hope somebody's doing a. So I wasn't really watching MSNBC last night, but I saw a lot of commentary on it on Twitter. This is the meltdowns. I hope somebody has put together a good run through of all the best moments on MSNBC.
I'm going to follow up with that and see
Yeah.
if I can pull it out.
Are you part of a news organization that could do that
a show
or something?
on Newsmax. I might be able to do that.
Yeah, just all the highlights of the meltdown I think would be pretty great to watch. Let's make sure we win first. Seems like Youngkin's and everybody's called it for all of them for the most part.
Miyares is the only one that's not called. And again, by the way, I've said this during the presidential race. So I'll say it again now. The media doesn't get to call races. I think we have to look at these jurisdictions and what's in and what's not. But I do feel pretty good that Youngkin's got enough of a lead outside the margin of error.
And then that attorney general race sounds like it's just a product of down ballot drop off.
I think that's it was reassuring. It was actually funny. Someone sent me a chart this morning. Every part of Virginia, from the Southwest to Tidewater up to Northern Virginia, was an increase for Republicans. Every county.
Massive increase.
And that is reassuring for so many reasons. Seeing people re-engage. We exceeded 2.7 million people voted in the 2017 gubernatorial election, which is a record for Virginia. Yeah. We exceeded that yesterday. It scared me, to be honest with you, in terms of the turnout, thinking if that's in Prince William or Alexandria or Arlington, that could be a problem. But it just shows you people were like, hey, I don't like what McAuliffe's saying. I don't like the direction that Biden's going. And they got out and they voted.
Yeah, they did. It was awesome to see. I think it's an indication, and you talk about this in your book too, how do we sell conservatism? And it's an indication of, I think, how to do it right. Because I think we'll definitely win in 22. I don't know about the Senate, but this Virginia race is a pretty good indication of what could possibly happen in the Senate.
But I will say this. I took a lot of inspiration. I loved your book, both from a looking at it from your experience in the military and how you've handled some of your situations, the challenges that you face, but also the way that you handled yourself personally and attitude. Because as an Irishman, I can get my Irish up from time to time, and I think the restraint that you showed and the way that you present some of these arguments, we can learn a lesson from. And I recommend it to folks all the time, because we need to be a fact. Like, if you think about the arguments the Democrats are making now, it's you're a Trump guy, you're a bad person, you're evil, you're a jerk, you're a sexist.
Very personally oriented.
It's personal, but it's not about the policies.
We're in the house recording right now, everybody. That's why you hear these buzzers going off.
So I think that presenting...
That's Pelosi. Stop talking about...
Like, I'm going to cut this podcast off. But that's the point, is if we can come across just factually based, saying the kind of the point that we just talked about with DC, but then coming at people when it's immigration or spending or the size of the government, or how we talked at the beginning of this about delivery. Would you rather have a nonprofit versus government helping individuals?
Those are real conversations.
That the left... But here's the thing, the left doesn't want to have them. No. Because they know, just like you said at the outset of this conversation, they know they'll lose that, because everybody will choose the private sector, the nonprofit over government every time, and they can't have that. So, but if we come at people in a factual, respectful, civil way, we'll win every time.
We can't copy their tactics.
No.
Because their tactics are, again, attack your character, undermine your character.
Right.
Our activist base does exactly that to the left, and it's stupid.
But here's why.
And they get mad at me when they're like, why aren't you saying this? And I'm like, because... only you care about that. Trust me. But also, here's the strategically. Here's why I don't think that's a good idea. If you cancel me out, or I cancel you out, okay, you're gone, right? You haven't won them over. What I want is more people to be conservative. I want persuasion?
Right.
Is persuasion the goal?
That may be the goal.
Yeah.
But the thing is that they believe in a lot of folks on both the far right and the far left, and it's not even the far right. I just think it's an activist. It's an activist base, right? Because I know plenty of far right people that agree with what we're talking about. But
I don't think there's a whole lot of difference on the spectrum of conservative principles between
its tactics,
Freedom Caucus, and what you would call moderate. I mean, now there's some real moderate Republicans, but let's say Mitch McConnell versus the Freedom Caucus. I don't think there's any difference philosophically. I don't think they disagree on policy. I think Mitch McConnell's just strategic, and the Freedom Caucus isn't. I mean, yesterday, was it yesterday? Yeah. Yesterday, Republicans were demanding that we do these roll call votes instead of voice votes on all this legislation. That's just suspension votes. We all agree on it. Just get it through. What were we really, out of some kind of principle, some kind of esoteric principle or something? And in theory, that's fine. You should do that. But guess what we were really doing? We were giving Pelosi and the Democrats more and more time to get it together for their reconciliation package. This is not smart. It's not strategic. But that's the thing, is that there's a lack of... So, like, I go back to the D.C. argument. I think Republicans right now today, and I brought this up with leader after leader of committees and in-house leadership on my show, which is to say, Republicans, if they're smart, would say, we agree with Democrats that people of D.C. should have the right to vote. Therefore, we are moving a bill right now to return it to Maryland. Get ahead of the argument. Yes.
Be smart about this stuff. Don't wait till it's on the tail end. And because suddenly if it becomes making D.C. a state or not, we lose. Why don't we've got to start playing checkers and say, how do we become smarter? So we say, okay, they want to deliver, veterans care. Well, here's how we can do it better. Let's get in front of this. We believe in
we're
education.
doing a good job on that on some issues. I think
Correct.
Climate change is a big one.
I think that voter
we fail
ID,
on healthcare,
but voter ID was done very well.
Yeah.
Where suddenly Democrats, who for decades have talked about needing not wanting anyone to have an ID except for everything else, suddenly we're like, what are you talking about? We've never supported this. I mean, I literally watched Jim Clyburn say, what are you guys talking about? We've never been for this.
That was a big rhetorical win.
But exactly, because Republicans were smart about how they argued it. It was very logical. It was respectful. It was fact-based. And then they looked dumb.
Yeah.
And so they suddenly came around. But if we can use those models going forward on other things, spending, whatever, we not only win the Democrat leaders over, but I think we win over their base. The same thing that happened in Virginia. It was so blatant. There's not enough Republicans to elect Glenn Youngkin, right? we don't really register in Virginia by party, but that's not the point. But there was enough people that said this guy's got common sense ideas. He's not going after
Speaking to issues.
He's speaking to issues. He's talking about how to make our families, our businesses, our communities
Because you can
better.
speak in talking points in a campaign like this. And a radical Democrat, just like you can do exactly what our activist base wants you to do. And what I'm constantly, and I say this openly at events all the time, I'm like, do not follow the performance artists that are raising money from you. You know all their names, but they're a clown show. And they're not fighting for you. They're fighting for their own fundraising and their ratings. If they're not giving you the tools of argumentation, then I'm not sure why you're listening to them.
Well, and I got to be, I mean, selfless plug, but that's why I wrote the book, because I needed people to understand that if you go at the friends and colleagues and family members with a logic-based argument on a lot of these issues, whether it's immigration or tax reform, what have you, you'll win. Don't name call. We don't need to go there.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, you might make them feel like a jerk and they might walk out of the house or something like that.
And they stop listening to you.
But they've stopped listening to you, one, and then you haven't gained anything. You've just gotten them to go away, which in some cases maybe that is a good thing if depending on like the family member. But
Thanksgiving is coming up.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but I'd rather win them over. I'd rather have them come back and go, you know what, you were right. I'm with you. I'll vote with you. I'll activate, or I'll donate, or whatever action you're trying to cull from them.
Yeah.
And so if we can do this in a better way, and we're watching this because on those arguments where we've done that, we've won.
Yeah. And conservatives like hearing debate too. I think we're, again, depending on the activist base, but normal conservatives like seeing debate. They like seeing us talk to Democrats. Here's an interesting observation. I think if you had Democrats on your show on Newsmax, nobody would be mad about it. They'd be like, "Oh, this is awesome!" Like they'd probably tune in more.
We have them. I mean, we do.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, one of the reasons that the Democrats like coming on my show is we don't yell at them. We don't do.
It's a debate.
My view is I want you to have your say. I'll come back at you and say, well, what do you think about this as the counter? But I want people to hear their argument and to say, wait a second, explain to me why you.
It makes you smarter,
right?
To know what their arguments are.
It makes our position better because we go, well, wait a second. If that's true, well, then why wouldn't you do this or that? And they go, well, so you can poke holes in them, you can make your side stronger.
Experience.
But I the thing that I like doing is not. I don't want to. If there's plenty of shows out there where you can get yelled at. Mm-hmm. That's not what we seek to do on my show on Newsmax. It's literally just to say, let's have a conversation, let's talk about the issue, and I'll tell you. I mean, I'm open about my position, so that's. But I'm not going to shout over anybody or treat them with.
What's interesting, the observation I was going to make though is, Chuck Todd getting dragged through the mud the other day because there was this insinuation that he was too kind to Republicans on his show. I was one of those Republicans not too long ago. He was not kind.
No, but that's the funny thing is, if the folks in the media allow you to talk, that's considered the left believes that those folks have to be activists, which a lot of them have become. So they don't want to
platform you. I mean, they get mad at even platforming. If you look at the Twitter comments under a Chuck Todd interview, or I was recently on Trevor Noah on The Daily Show, and he was very polite. It was a very cordial conversation, which a lot of people weren't expecting. And so the right loved it. And I think a lot of moderates loved it too. I mean, we got a lot of good comments from liberals, but there's a difference between liberals and leftists. And the leftists will be on Twitter saying, stop platforming fascists, because I'm a fascist apparently.
Here's why though. I don't think they like when we go on there.
Yeah, they don't want to
hear it because to them it's like we don't like you're making sense. Stop. Mm-hmm. We don't want to hear it, and that's the problem. So that the idea is then we'll cancel you and deplatform you and censor you because that way you can't make the argument.
And what we got to tell our own side is because they hear that, they hear this conversation that we're having, and they say that's why you have to screw them,
right?
And it's like no. You're misinterpreting what's happening here. This is why we're winning. This is how we persuade.
Think about this right now, right? The left owns every major institution in this country. The media, academia, government, big tech, big corporate America. And yet, look at what just happened in Virginia. Look at Biden's poll numbers, right? If the American people bought into the ideology of all those big institutions, Biden would be up to 80-20. And we
right.
But
because that's what our site says. They say that they never get held accountable for anything. And I'm like, look at the polling in this election yesterday. They are being held accountable.
Look at this podcast, right? Look at the rankings of it. People are going, I want to go other places to get information. And that's the beauty of this, my show on Newsmax, your podcast. There's a lot of sites where, because we've now given people an opportunity to go hear a conversation that they weren't hearing on the Today Show, Good Morning America, or being profiled in the New York Times, people are smart enough to say, okay, there's got to be somewhere else I can go. They're migrating to those places, and they're voting with their wallet, they're voting with their fingers or their space bars or their return bar. But they get it. They have an opportunity to go somewhere else, and they're using that to go there and support those places.
And I got to have more liberal-leaning people on my podcast, to be honest with you. But it's tough because you get colleagues on. Maybe they'd come on, maybe they wouldn't. But oftentimes politicians are very canned,
Right.
And it's not going to be a fun
No, because, and that's why, you mentioned we've had the problem I have once in a while with having some Democrats on my show is that they think that everything's a fight. Whereas sometimes I just want to know, I'm like, tell me why Pelosi would be doing X. Like, what's the strategy? And they're like, well, we're going to continue to fight for the American people. I'm like,
got it.
Cut through. I got it. Check. But explain to me the strategic, background of why they moved this there, why they pulled this bill, and blah blah. What is she seeking to get?
Frankly, they're not very good at talking to conservative audiences because it's so foreign to them.
Well, they're not used to.
I'm used to it.
Right, but think about this. You just said you went on Trevor Noah. I went on Bill Maher last week. Right? We're used to going into places.
I got to watch that one. That's
well, let's keep going. But I think it depends on. We'll go to those places in some ways because we have to, in some ways because I think we want to expand the message. Mm-hmm. The left doesn't want to do the same. Because, again, I think that they know they can't explain it. If they can't just use a bumper sticker or call names, that's not then they don't know what to do.
They don't feel they ever have to think through those arguments.
Right, but they're used to going on platforms that they're not going to get the pushback. They're going to go on the Today Show, and it's just like, so are you great or just really awesome? and that's
what can we do to make you more awesome?
Right, and why are some people not believing or supporting how awesome you are? I mean, they get
that's a good question.
They get no. So the idea of getting any real pushback, and that's why when we talked about Peter Doocy, think about it. The idea that the one individual who asks logical, top-of-mind questions in a respectful, civil way is considered the guy asking the tough questions.
Yeah.
I mean, that tells you about everyone else in that briefing room.
Yeah, and I noticed that in grad school, too, where everybody's pretty liberal, and they literally don't know what conservatives think, right? These are smart people
like
in a policy. We're like zoo animals to them. And this is a policy school, so you would think you'd be pretty well versed in thinking through, like, how would I debate this person? I mean, how do I get into their arguments? And you find debates or discussions with them to be rather easy because it's easy to know what they think. I guess I'm in the liberal bubble there, so I know exactly what I learned a lot from it, and they're very transparent, and this is my bias showing, but a little shallow also. Yep. So because I'll often ask, is there something I'm missing here? And I've yet to be surprised by someone who's like, and where I hear an argument I just haven't heard before. But I love watching like a reasonable Democrat who I'll have a conversation with. I'll be like, do you understand our side? Let me explain it to you. And they'll be like, huh.
Right. And
they'll have this look like, that's actually kind of interesting. I mean, I'm talking about
they don't
liberals,
hear it. Right.
People who are actually open-minded.
Yeah. But I'll tell you, the funny thing is, after I left the White House, I probably did 20 college campuses, including Berkeley, Penn, UMass. And it was fascinating at institutions that are clearly left-leaning, right? There's no question about it, as you just said. But I would ask them, how many conservative speakers have you ever heard from? At most, it was 2 or 3. Usually it was one or I was the first. But what was fascinating is what began at the beginning of everyone, bar none, was this, I'm going to protest. And I finally learned a little tactic where I go on and say, look, here's the deal. I'll stay here as long as you want. I'll answer any question. Nothing is off limits. I'll stay here as long as you want. But you have to agree that everybody gets to be treated with respect. So let everyone ask the question. I'll take it. Nothing is off the table. But you have to let them talk. You can't. And so people, and by the middle of it, they were like, I kind of agree with you. I literally, and I can say this because it's on video, got a standing ovation at Berkeley.
What?
Yeah.
Liar.
That's what I'm saying. It's on video.
Good for you.
But I'm telling you, when I walked into that and you have that many armed security folks with you and they're telling you stories about, this got caught on fire and this got blown up, my hands were shaking as I'm walking on. Yeah. But the thing is that so many of these folks are shielded from any kind of discussion of anything but liberal orthodoxy. Yeah. And so for them to hear it, it's like, wow, it's sort of like, watching someone try a new food for the first time. They're like, I've never tasted that before. I like it. And
well, it's good to hear that there's some open-mindedness. And I think that's changed radically in America in the last year because, Trump sucked all the energy out of the room.
Yeah.
Let's just be honest. It's a fact. And so they didn't see anything that we believe,
Correct.
right? Because they just hated him.
It was all about him.
And we can say that's irrational. I think it's irrational, the hatred of him. But, they did. And so they couldn't see anything else. But now it's right in front of them. It doesn't hurt. Of course, the Democrats are lurching very far to the left. And so we have a real opportunity here, not just now, but for the future, I think, to be in a place where we can always say, 10, 20 years from now, we can always say, look back to this era, okay, when they had control, when they thought they had the mandate. What did they do? Do you ever want that again?
Right.
Just trust us. And I say, look, I'm not saying you should dismiss everything a liberal believes or wants. When a liberal says, I want good health care for everybody in America, I don't think we should disagree with that statement. When a liberal says, I think we should reduce emissions, I don't think we should disagree with that statement. I think we should disagree forcefully with the solutions that they want to impose upon us.
The goals are good.
Yeah, but let's just say, hey, look, we can agree here. And all of a sudden we sound very reasonable to the suburbs and we win a place like Virginia, which we just shouldn't have been possible. And it's a good deal. We're coming up at our time. Do you want to end with anything? Where should people follow you?
At Sean Spicer on Twitter, on Instagram as well. 6:00 every night on Newsmax, Spicer and Company, and then the book Radical Nation can go to Amazon. Newsmax set up a link, newsmax.com/23. And then obviously I've got SeanSpicer.com is the website where you can find anything that you just forgot.
That's easy.
So, and thank you. I appreciate you having me on. It's, as I said to you before the podcast started, I thoroughly enjoyed your book. It sort of helped me recenter and also just, the service that you've given to this country, the sacrifice, but also the way that you've handled it has just been with such dignity and grace and frankly, blazed a path that others should look at, whether you're, in military service or government service, because it's just, I had so many similar circumstances without ever being injured in terms of how I had circumstances. And I really admired how you handled yours in a much more adverse way than I ever had to. And it was very inspirational. And again, I don't think you have to serve in the military to understand and take a lot of things away from how you handled a lot of situations and challenges that you face. So I cannot say enough about how much I enjoyed your book. And I think for folks that have an interest in serving or just want to understand some of the choices, because how you handle, as someone who had a similar Saturday Night Live experience, I really looked at how you, but I thought how you handle it. And I'm reading this thing and actually, as I told you, I was listening to it and I was watching how you handled that interaction, and it was so much better than I would have done. But as a person, I looked at it and said, you know what? That's how you handle a situation like that. And so
I really appreciate that.
Thank you for having me on the podcast.
There's a lot coming from you, Sean. Thank you.
You bet.